The Russians have been unable, after a week of the Ukrainians crossing over and invading Russia, which is a sentence I didn't think I'd be saying. After a week of them crossing over into Kursk and invading Russia, they've been unable to stop the Ukrainian advances, and they've also been unable to push the Ukrainians out. Now, there is evidence to show that the Ukrainians are slowing down, that the Ukrainians are not capturing villages as rapidly, and the Ukrainians, while they did take losses at the start, trying to break through the defensive lines, are taking some more losses, with some of their armored personnel carriers getting hit pretty hard by the Russians. But the Russians have failed at trying to push them out. Their counterattacks have been unable to dislodge the Ukrainians seriously, and they've been heavily reliant on local conscripts, under-trained troops, undersupplied troops, and whatever they can quickly divert, including reaching diversions from Kaliningrad, undermanning Kaliningrad in order to try to keep Kursk defending itself. And we've also gotten reports that the Russians have redeployed some troops from the Kharkiv front and from other fronts to try to add more defensive personnel in the Kursk Oblast. So, you know, the advances are continuing, but slowing down as more Russian troops finally arrive. The Ukrainians have been unable to be pushed out by the Russians, and they continue to launch new attacks and probe to find holes, go around villages, and see if they can continue to expand their hold of territory. Here's just one example of a Ukrainian soldier posing on top of a Russian flag on many of the different villages that have been captured. If you wanted to get an idea of the general situation now as it stands, here is a map from what I think is one of the more credible mappers. There are a lot of different versions of like what exactly Ukraine captures, but I just want to throw out there that just because Ukrainian soldiers have been spotted somewhere, and this is how a lot of people are determining how far the Kursk advances are, just because Ukrainian soldiers have been spotted there does not mean that they control it. That does not mean that they control the location. It just means that Ukrainian troops were there. If you want to figure out if Ukraine controls something, you have to have evidence of heavy presence. You have to have evidence that they've rolled past it and they've started capturing other locations that can make you assume that they've captured locations. A good example of that would be like this video, which was posted by a very good author. This guy, Yaroslav, actually wrote a book that I highly recommend that's called Our Enemies Will Vanish, that talks about the war in Ukraine. I think breaks it down in a very effective way. He released a video, well, he didn't release, he reposted a video of Ukrainian soldiers marching through a village on the border. If you want to know where this border, where this village is, it's right here. So it's right on the barrier between the territory that's unknown about what Ukraine captures. The reason it was confirmed is because videos like this make it pretty undeniable that they captured the village. If they're able to just walk through it, you know, slowly, not hastily, that indicates that they have control. So if you're seeing other maps that indicates other villages are controlled because there were troops that were there for a moment or troops past it, just know that that doesn't necessarily mean the Ukrainians control it, because they could quickly be pushed out in a counterattack. They could have just been passing through because they wanted to capture another location, and they could have just been recon teams doing reconnaissance, which is certainly not the same as an armored unit coming in to capture a village or capture a small city. So just putting that forward as to why this is controlled here. In the yellow, the stuff that's unknown about its control, about who controls what, is where it is, because all of this yellow indicates areas that they might control, they might not control. You get the idea. Also, in this video is a very strange moment where at the about 11 or 10 second, maybe 12 second mark, there is a civilian in this Russian village that screams "Slava Ukraini," which means glory to Ukraine, and it's the back and forth slogan. They say "Slava Ukraini," and you're supposed to respond "Heroam Slava," which means glory to Ukraine, and then you respond "Glory to the heroes." Hey, Grassroots Hegemon, thank you for the $2. Why are they diverting forces from 16 hours away? They're diverting forces because the forces that they do have in the Kursk region, that are, a lot of them are conscripts that are not even supposed to be used in combat, they are surrendering quite a lot. In fact, even though we were going to be talking about map stuff first, let me skip a little bit forward and show you just like, there are a lot of captured Russian conscripts. These are just a few pictures that I've gathered. showing capture Russian conscripts. You can see a variety in age here. Some people more look like in their 30s. Some people look more like they're in their 50s and 60s. But in other pictures, you can see a lot more younger people, which can indicate conscripts that, you know, signed up or were being trained and they wanted to send out but haven't been sent out yet, that have been captured after they were sent into battle because they just desperately needed the manpower. Here's more pictures of captured Russian personnel. And then there's more pictures of, well, this is actually a video. This is a screen cap of a video of Russian POWs holding a Ukrainian flag, being made to hold a Ukrainian flag by their captors, by the Ukrainians. So there's one thing that you could really say about this operation. If there's one thing that I'm pretty confident in, it's the fact that the Ukrainians have captured a lot of POWs. Now, there's also some videos, in some purported videos, showing Ukrainian POWs being captured as well, but the overwhelming majority of them seems to be the Ukrainians capturing Russian POWs. I heard from one source that it might be up to 2,000 captured POWs, and this was from a Russian source, mind you, so this was not a Ukrainian source, but we don't have any solid 100% numbers. We have pictures of groups of soldiers surrendering in like groups of 10, 20, 30, and even one instance 40. But this is definitely one thing the Ukrainians have gotten from this, is a big trough of Russian POWs. And so if people are surrendering, if people are not very experienced, they're much more likely to get killed in battle. Definitely, since a lot of the Ukrainian units that have been dedicated to this are not like, you know, just like filler units. While some of them are from the border with Belarus, others are elite units that have fought all across the front line. And then they're facing soldiers that have like a month of training and were never even supposed to see the front line. Yeah, you're going to catch a lot of POWs in that environment. But even if there are a lot of conscripts and there's a lot of undertrained personnel and there's not a lot of, you know, necessarily the top crack units that are fighting over here, that does not mean that the Ukrainians are not taking losses. To advance, you have to leave cover, you have to show yourself in the open, and if there's anything that I've learned from this war, is that the scariest thing about this war for me is battlefield transparency. Everything is seen all the time. It's very difficult to gather a group of 10, 20, 30 armored vehicles or a group of 100, 200 soldiers to do a surprise attack on a position, because everywhere all the time there's drones, Mavic drones and other drones, fixed-wing aircraft, fixed-wing UAVs that are flying around trying to get different photographs and video of the front line at all times, with teams of drone pilots having cycles where one will sleep for 6 hours, wake up, come, then pilot the drone as the other goes to sleep, and go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, 24 hours a day to make sure that any movement is seen.
Morally corrupt, bankrupt man.
Hey, DK Art and Design, thank you so much for becoming a YouTube member. I appreciate that. To see any type of movement, to capture it, and then strike any gathering of troops. And while we've mostly talked about this in reference to Russian advances as of recent, now that the Ukrainians are advancing and they have to leave cover, they're facing the same problem. And as the Ukrainians tried to break through east from what they've been able to control, from exactly Plekevo, which is from the video we just watched earlier of them walking through the villages, we can see over here that they've tried to advance this direction. They've attacked in the direction of Gry, but they took some pretty bad losses. If you look here, you can see multiple Ukrainian BTRs that were hit, destroyed, and damaged on the path to try to capture these locations quickly. And it ended not great for these soldiers. We don't know the exact number of casualties, but we do know that there's multiple confirmed through public OSINT that we can see here, destroyed Ukrainian equipment. And here are some pictures of that Ukrainian equipment.
Is the conscription thing geographically biased for Russians, or is it just grab them where you can get them type of deal?
It's it's biased in the way that there's more conscription as a percentage of population in certain areas, and those areas tend to be in Central Asia, and they tend to be in regions of Russia that are more poor, especially as the Ukrainian government has offered more and more and more starting pay and bonuses to try to incentivize people to sign up and fight. And so if you're somewhere from Tuva and now you're being offered like $3,000, $4,000 a month to join the Russian armed forces, which is an astronomically large amount of money in Russia, then you're gonna think more about that suggestion than if you're a more well-off Muscovite who is working in the banking sector in Moscow. So while there isn't like Tuvans will be recruited at this rate much higher, it tends to go that way due to the socioeconomics of Russia. But here are pictures of those destroyed Ukrainian BTRs that were destroyed on their path to the village. And here is some footage that has been geolocated by one of the more reliable geolocating Twitter accounts, GeoConfirmed. They have actually located some of the footage where we have been involved in personally while doing reports. For example, that Here's on Boat video. Here is footage from them showing the Ukrainian BTRs getting, blown up. This is from a Russian drone filming these Ukrainian BTRs. Again, this is the effect of that battlefield transparency. And here are them being engaged, being attacked from the sides, fired upon, catches flame. That PTR is donezo. Again, you can see that the Ukrainians are advancing, but these advances come at a cost. And all these troops that are getting killed in these advances could instead be defending Pokrovsk, could instead be defending Chasiv Yar, could instead be defending down south in Zaporizhia, could be defending Lipsy, Volchansk, any of these other locations. But instead they're engaged in this attack. Whether or not this gamble is going to pay off, we do not know yet. We cannot say. But what I can say is that these troops are paying the price for the territory that they're capturing. Syrskyi might say 1,000 square kilometers of territory, but this comes with losses. And while being in the pro-Ukraine space, most of the footage you're going to see is Russian losses. These losses are real too, and they are paying the price. While Ukrainian morale is high, even with the understanding of losses, the Ukrainians have less personnel, and so every loss that they suffer hurts just that much more. Now, there is, of course, the equation that we've talked about before, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it here when talking about these personnel issues, which is that the Ukrainians, by attacking into Kursk, are causing diversions from out east. Whether it's going to be enough to remove significant amounts of pressure from Pokrovsk to try to slow down the Russian advances, which are capturing like a village a day and large swaths of territory every day. As you can see, all this red territory here was captured just within the last 24 hours. All this bright red territory just within the last 24 hours, capturing the less of this village and then moving past it towards the next major location, which is now here, which they're glide bombing and airstriking really, really hard as the Ukrainians try to get civilians away. So the idea is to divert these troops to Kursk. There's been reports of that happening to some degree, but not enough for the Ukrainians defending on the ground to feel like that they felt a difference. But even if they're taking losses, there are still attempts by the Ukrainians to advance. There's still attempts to advance east, as we can see here, even if it came with losses, and some of these villages will probably be taken in the days ahead. There are still an attempt to advance into Kornevo, and from what I hear, there have been some gains in the east of the city.
Russians just surrendering implies they're not afraid of mistreatment, or invested in the war, like the German surrender waves at the end of WW1.
Thank you so much for the $5. Not being mistreated in captivity and that information spreading around, if the Russians cannot suppress that information or boost information in counterance to it that, makes that information go away or be hidden, that certainly can help. And I would say that a lack of training combined with the idea that none of them even thought they were going to go into the special operation, into Ukraine, into the invasion, probably comes together to cause a lot of people to think, hey, we're surrounded. The Ukrainians caught all the villages around here. It's probably better to cut our losses. But yes, the Ukrainians have also advanced into parts of the east of Kornevo. They've captured some of these villages here, from what I've read. We haven't got any visual confirmation yet, and so I can't confirm 100%, but that's what the word is. The Ukrainians have also been spotted up in the yellow zone up here, past a lot of these villages as they try to go along the major roads, which are not as damaged as in much of eastern Ukraine. A lot of what is helping the Ukrainians here is the fact that this area of Russia has just not seen the same destruction that much of Ukraine has in the areas that they were trying to advance before. Let me give you an idea in comparison. So this area has been largely unscathed by the war. So if you look at videos from here, it's like clean roads, largely undestroyed buildings, gas stations that work, and all this like generally unpockmarked territory. Whereas if you're in eastern Ukraine, you're somewhere like Donetsk. Like, look at these pictures of the Donetsk region from satellites. You can see the front line. You can see where the artillery has flattened the homes and the forests and the villages. And if you zoom in here, you can see it even better. You can see where the normal farms are and all that farmland that are being developed and used by people, and you can see the areas that have just been destroyed time again and again and again and again by the Russian shelling and the Ukrainian shelling back and forth. And this is along the entirety of Donetsk, Luhansk, going into Zaporizhia and coming around into Kherson until they meet the Dnieper River, where a lot of that destruction is going to be over the river, not on the ground. I mean, because there's a river separating sides. So if that's the type of infrastructure you've been working on for the last 2.5 years, and all of a sudden you got clean roads, working gas stations, you know, a bunch of buildings that are not completely caved in and destroyed, yeah, you can probably move a little bit faster, because it almost feels like, while of course invading Russia is not easy mode, when it comes to driving, it probably does feel like that. But also on top of that, when somebody puts a mine like in one of these locations on the front here, in any of this area, like 2 years ago, those mines still work. Most of those mines should still work, meaning that if you place a mine there 2, 3, 4, 5 years before and somebody still rolls over it, you're dead. You're done. Your car explodes. Whereas around here, when you talk about going around villages, which the Ukrainians are able to do, in large part, that's because there's not mines everywhere. And since there's not mines everywhere, they can kind of freely drive through a field. They could freely drive through some areas. As time goes on, the Russians actually dig in and they start putting mines everywhere, which is probably not going to be pleasant for the Kursk civilians, of course. But once they do that, that situation will change. But that's not the situation as it is right now, which is almost certainly helping the Ukrainians advance. I also have heard reports, and I'm waiting for more confirmation from the Belarusian government, like public statements, because so far it's like anonymous Belarusian military like officials and like monitoring outlets and such. But this isn't the first time this has happened either. Reportedly, Belarus is taking some of its active military equipment. So this is military equipment that is in use by the army, or is supposed to be in use by the army for war, that if Belarus had to fight it against, say, I don't know, Latvia, whoever it would be. This equipment is being taken and transferred over to Russia so they can put it in their employ and then use it against the Ukrainians. So to be clear, the Russians are using their equipment that they've made, old Soviet equipment that the Soviets made, North Korean equipment, Iranian equipment, and also Belarusian equipment. While you hear sometimes you'll hear from like Russian state media or the Russian government along the lines of, well, the only reason Ukraine hasn't fallen is because of NATO and NATO's support and Western supplies. And it's true that Western supplies have helped Ukraine a whole lot, and it's hard to imagine them holding a lot of the cities that they hold now if it wasn't for, you know, the artillery shipments coming from abroad. Russia has been sustained by foreign investment and foreign supplies as well. Belarusian, North Korean, Iranian, all sorts of equipment, not to even talk about the foreign mercenaries that they have to hire to fill the ranks of the war that their own people won't fight. Point is that while people talk about the Ukrainians needing foreign help to survive the war, that's also true about the Russians, but they just like to be a lot more chauvinistic and pretend self-reliant about it. And the not Chinese equipment they're using, well, Chinese military equipment is one thing, which, I mean, we don't have anything hard confirming that. We have confirmed that they're using DJI drones, but so are the Ukrainians. And the Chinese companies are along the lines of, oh, we're not letting them, we don't want our drones to be used for military operations, but we'll take the GPS out and we'll make it a lighter load and we'll make it easy to use in military operations. It's for no particular reason. They know what they're doing, or at least some of the companies seem to know what they're doing. As for other economic investment, a big thing that the Chinese have given the Russians outside of an energy consuming market, even if it's at a discount, is also CNC machines to support the war effort, ball bearings, the type of stuff that is necessary to keep the military industry flowing, and them keep on making T-80s, T-90s, modern tanks to supplement their old Soviet stockpiles, which are starting to wear a little thin, hence the Belarusian military shipments. If you guys are interested, though, as the Ukrainians continue to make advances, and we're going to see some more villages get caught, who knows if they'll be able to capture Konevo, who knows if they'll continue to divert more troops over here, considering the continued pressure that Russia is putting on Pokrovsk and the advances that they're making there. And not just there, you also hear a lot of complaints about the fighting in Chasiv Yar and how brutal that is and how bad the Russians really want to take Chasiv Yar, as they've actually crossed over parts of the dividing line between them, and they're now fighting on parts of the west side of the city. There's manpower shortages there. Will the Ukrainians continue to divert more troops to the Kursk operation? I wouldn't be surprised if they do, considering that they're moving. They're not in the trenches. They're not in the dirt. They're capturing stuff. When's the last time that happened? When is the last time that that happened? So I don't expect the Ukrainians to let go of this in the near future. And I also do not expect the Ukrainians to pull across the border once they eventually, because it is going to happen, considering the size of Russia, this grinds to a halt. I do believe from everything that I've heard that there's a good chance, and I would even say it's more likely than not, that part of this is under the idea that negotiations could be sooner than later, even though I think that the odds of them succeeding sooner than later is very low. And if that is the case, they'd rather have something to use to negotiate at the negotiating table so they can get their territory in Kherson, so they can get their territory in Mariupol, and they can get some of their territory back, if not as much of it as possible. Oh, and if you guys are interested as to what Joe Biden thinks of the whole thing, he kind of doesn't talk about it too much directly, and he still refuses to talk about it too much directly.
President, what do you have to say about what's happening in Russia and Ukraine? Have you spoken with anyone in the Ukrainian government?
I've spoken with my staff on a regular basis, probably every 4 or 5 hours for the last 6 or 8 days. And it's creating a real dilemma for Putin, and we've been in direct contact, constant contact with the Ukrainians. That's all I'm going to say about it while it's active.
While it's active. So Biden has basically committed to being quiet about the whole thing. He confirms that he knows about it, which of course he knows about it. He's the president of the United States, says it's quite a dilemma, and then says nothing else. I think there's a worry that like any signals from Washington, they don't want to discourage the Ukrainians because that would at least publicly speaking, because that'd probably be a bad look. The Ukrainians finally start to take something. They finally start to move the front. They finally do that kind of combined arms warfare that so many Western generals and Western analysts have been demanding of them. And then they get chastised about it because they chose the weak point in the front, which just so happened to be in Russia. So we're not getting much critique of it, but I also think that he's hesitant to be like, rah, rah, rah. Because if it looks like the United States is directing an invasion of Russia, then they're fearful of a response being directed towards the United States. They're, of course, fearful of the ever-present escalation that Jake Sullivan, I'm sure, is talking about in every meeting around this issue. But largely speaking, he seems to want to keep his mouth shut so he doesn't send any signals about the topic that he doesn't intend to send. On the other end of the spectrum, Russian state media seems to be having a real doozy. I'll see if I can we'll play the Steve Rosenberg segment because I'm just a big fan of Steve Rosenberg's state media segments where he talks about how state media is responding. And I'll see if I can find a clip of Putin talking about the Kursk invasion, because there are some clips of him going back and forth with the governor of Kursk, who is citing numbers about how much territory was taken and how over 100,000 Russians have had to evacuate their homes. And Putin shut him down real quick. He didn't seem to like the cameras looking at that too much.
On the front page of the Russian government paper Российская Gazeta today, Vladimir Putin trying to show that he's in control and that the situation in southern Russia is under control. When he met senior aides yesterday, I found the language that President Putin used quite interesting. He spoke about the situation in the border areas, the events taking...
I love it. I gotta say, the way that Russia uses its kind of clinical, surgical language. Oh, it's not an invasion of Ukraine. It's the special military operation. And if you call it an invasion, you're going to get penalties for that. Just the clinical use of language. Oh, we're not being invaded. It's a situation where events are taking place. Just as clinical and as boiled down and as surgical as possible to try to draw as little attention to it as possible and not make people panic, even if it's a situation where it kind of deserves a little bit of panic. And if you check out the Russian military blogger channels, my God, panic is one way to describe it.
Taking place. One word that was absent was the word invasion, as if the message to the Russian people is that the situation with the Ukrainian attack is serious but containable. And so the headline here is Vladimir Putin discussed the situation in Bryansk, Belgorod and Kursk regions. The enemy will receive a response. Nezavisima Gazeta leads on the extraordinary number of people being moved out of the combat zone. In Kursk region, more than 16% of the region's population is being evacuated. Izvestia headlines Vladimir Putin's comments on the prospects, or lack of them, for peace talks with Ukraine in the light of what's happening. What on earth can we talk to them about? And this opinion piece in Izvestia I found very interesting today by the pro-rector of the Diplomatic Academy of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Oleg Karpovich. So someone who's very much part of the system. It gives an insight, I think, into what the consequences of Ukraine's incursion may be, not so much for Ukraine, but inside Russia. So first of all, the writer says, state and society must unite to the maximum and ditch unnecessary sentimentality. Instead of complaining about domestic discomforts like the blocking of popular internet resources, by this I suspect he means YouTube, or complaining about the impossibility.
For those of you who don't know, YouTube was recently blocked in Russia because of its hostile leanings and its hosting media that's, you know, propaganda against Russia, like my channel, for example. And so that they've purposely made it so YouTube's basically unusable by slowing it down. But it didn't just end up affecting YouTube. It ended up affecting a lot of other places where people could freely upload content that is either critical of the Russian government or exposes Russian government war crimes, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, they're suppressing YouTube and a lot of more open source video content creation platforms where they can't directly control the narrative.
Of returning to pre-war life, we need to be focused, to bite the bullet, and to adapt to the changing reality. Second, it's important to strengthen work with the younger generation, which is being smothered by the might of Western propaganda. Finally, we need to clear the information space and the cultural landscape of all forms of destructive influence on hearts and minds. Both the business community and cafe society must accept that we have passed the point of no return and that we are building a new, stress-resistant type of statehood for decades to come. In order to quieten down the West and to force it to give up its fruitless attempts to deliver a strategic defeat on us, we must demonstrate unquestioning unity and a common belief that we can achieve game-changing strategic results. Now, this sounds like a clarion call for more censorship, more state control, more state propaganda, and a final rupture with Western civilization.
Okay, so a lot of we need to buckle down, we need to pull up our bootstraps, we need to get ready for the pain, the pressure, and the hard times that are coming to the glory of the Russian Federation, and bite the bullet. It's state propaganda to prepare the population for difficult times ahead, not only in the Kursk Oblast, but possibly economically, as supporting this extremely expensive endeavor is going to continue to negatively affect Russians, not only now, but for a long time to come. Demographically, as more people are scared away from recruitment centers out of the country, are either injured and or killed in combat or otherwise, as Russia already had a demographic problem, which is only being made worse. Russia, of course, diplomatically is suffering massively. Its trade with Europe is suffering massively. And all these negative effects, you need to get ready. You need to be prepared for the pain that is coming, because the only way that Russia can survive this is if the people of Russia buckle down, unite, and as Russia gathers the resources from its immense empire into a fist and throws it at Ukraine again and again and again, the public must grind their teeth as every punch comes with the death of their sons. That seems to be the vibe that I'm getting from Russian state TV as it tries to prepare the public for this ongoing disaster. And then the things got worse. What's that old joke? The great big book of Russian history. You open it up, first page, and then it got worse. Next page, and then it got worse. And next page, and then it got worse.